It's a pleasure to be here today, and very exciting to see so many faces. I've titled my presentation today Strategy and Action, and I know that we're talking about career crossroads, but when we're talking about design, I think the most successful design comes when strategy, the thinking, the researching actually meets with the action and the tactical execution of those things. And so today I really want to talk about how human-centred design actually promotes these two things coming together, how that differs potentially from traditional design, and maybe some of the practices that you're using day to day currently. And finally, some really tangible principles and ways that hopefully you might be able to go away and use human-centred design in your organisations. Just quickly, so I work for Mentally Friendly. I'm the strategy director there. We're a product and service design studio, and we're dedicated to wellbeing and positive behaviour change. Just a couple of examples of how we have used human-centred design. I won't labour the case studies for too long, just a quick intro into how we use the principles that I'll be talking about today in our own work. So one example is with the Commonwealth Bank, most recently. We created a financial wellbeing one-on-one product, and it was also a service as well. So what we actually discovered is that regardless of how in tune people are with their financial situation, everybody, myself included, and probably many in this room at some point kind of suffer from some anxiety about their financial situation. And regardless of whether on paper their financial situation is a good or bad one, actually helping them navigate how to use their money, to save their money, and all these kinds of things is something that we kind of helped to design with the Commonwealth Bank and is now being implemented in their centres today, or in their branches rather. We've also worked with the ABC on Triple J to help them kind of modernise the radio and listener experience across their apps. And we created a mobile product that basically retains the simple guided and live experience of radio. And finally, we've also worked with Relationships Australia to create a social enterprise known as Radiant. And this is a digital service that basically helps people who are seeking therapy to actually find a therapist who is most suited to them and their needs. So these are just a couple of examples of digital products that we've created which use the human-centred design principles that I'll talk to you about now. Michael said it before, is UX, how did you phrase it, Michael? Is UX just graphic design with better PR? Hopefully not, would be my answer to that question. I think human-centred design is much more about a mindset rather than a process. So any good approach that you have in the way that you tackle your design will naturally have good processes and approaches and ways of actually letting you execute that. But first and foremost, human-centred design is very much a mindset. So what we mean by that is, first of all, actually going into a project with empathy and curiosity, and also going into a project with a growth mindset. So that basically means being happy to be proven wrong, or happy to actually see a contrary result to the one that you think might actually be the best solution, actually meet the needs of the customer. And without that empathy, and without that curiosity, and without that growth mindset, human-centred design is probably not going to come about. One of the other key tenets of human-centred design is designing with and not for. So a lot of traditional design approaches will actually see designers kind of treat the solution to the problem, or rather the audience, as having the exact same needs and challenges and wants and desires that they face day to day, and kind of creating a solution based on how they feel that solution or that challenge needs to be addressed. With human-centred design, what we're actually doing is we're co-designing solutions with customers, with clients, and actually making sure that the solution meets the needs of the people that we're designing for. testing early and often, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the piece, but a lot of traditional design approaches kind of postulate that the designer already has the solution before the process has kind of begun. That's obviously quite risky and potentially hazardous to the outcome of the project, but what human-centred design promotes, or one of its key tenets, is actually testing early and testing often. So every design process will have a research component, and that gives us confidence that we're actually working towards the best solution for the needs and requirements of the customer. But actually, it's testing the assumptions that we have that gives us the evidence that we need to design a better solution. So it may seem a nuanced difference, but the actual testing to get evidence is a really key difference to just simply researching to get confidence. Human-centred design is in many ways inextricably linked to uncertainty. So as humans, we are predictably unpredictable, and that makes it really, really difficult as designers for us to design. I mean, in many ways, it would be much, much easier if we didn't have to involve humans in the design process. The problem is the result is obviously much less compelling when we do that. When we kind of start out on the design process, we have really high uncertainty. We don't necessarily know how people are going to react. And what we think intuitively might happen may not actually necessarily be the case. It often feels like this when we're kind of going through the human-centred design process. You're kind of thinking to yourself, shit, this kind of feels a little bit uneasy. I can feel like I'm not really sure if this solution's going to work or not. I'm holding on to my peers and colleagues and wondering if they're kind of feeling the same way. Trust me, they are. What we do to overcome this is we actually formulate a test. And with that test, we run that test, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about how this can be done. We build evidence, and we build evidence over time until eventually we get to a point where we have high confidence and a tangible output, which has been tested with the people that are going to be using the product. So what I actually wanted to do now was just kind of share a couple of key principles, which hopefully will be useful to some of the people in the room in terms of actually applying some of this thinking and sort of move it out of a theory and into a reality. Always start with an assumptions register. Okay, so there's a bit going on here, an assumptions register. What's that, you may say? Well, it doesn't have to be an overwhelming piece of documentation. Simply having an assumptions register in a Google spreadsheet is a really good place to start. But basically what happens is you can't have a sensible conversation with your client about a design solution unless you can attach that solution to evidence. And you can't formulate evidence if you don't know what you're testing. So the best way to work out what to test is to document all of the assumptions that you might have about what you believe the best solution might be. And not just assumptions about the solution, but assumptions about the way that you think your customer might interact. Assumptions about what you think MVP or minimum viable product might be. Assumptions about the way you think that, people who are actually going to be on the coalface are going to deliver this product. All of these assumptions need to be tested, and they need to have evidence against them so that you can have intelligent, sophisticated and meaningful conversations with your clients about why this is the best solution for their problem. Now, assumptions are important to document, but assumptions as a statement, obviously an assumption is something you believe to be true, needs to be changed into a hypothesis in order for it to be tested. And a hypothesis is a testable statement, and it has two parts to it. So we like to, most people would kind of write a hypothesis as if this happens, then this is the result, so that kind of action result. So just to kind of spell it out a little bit more, you know, let's say that we were creating the website for the Adobe Symposium, we might actually have an assumption that, you know, people will register. But how we actually test that hypothesis is that we say if we move the registration button to the main navigation, then people will register. And we would have a series of hypotheses like that we would test with customers, and we would gain some evidence around whether that was the best way to actually solve that problem. One of the other principles I wanted to touch on today was about embracing your bias. So this is something that I hear a lot of people talking about bias, obviously, and I think the common line is to sort of ignore it, you know, ignore your bias, like make sure that you don't take your bias into projects. But I think as human beings with experiences, that's nigh on impossible. We all have motivated reasoning. We've all seen things work, and we all kind of have a gut feel about the way that things should be done. And I think simply saying, don't, you know, ignore your bias, let's kind of take this back to a sort of neutral playing field is just, that's bullshit, really, like it can't be done. So I think that the thing to actually do is to embrace your bias and be honest about the fact that you have seen things happen that have worked in the past, or you have seen things happen that haven't, that you have a gut feeling or intuition about the way that you think the problem could be solved, and to actually document all of these feelings as assumptions, which can then be changed into hypotheses and tested and have evidence created around that, so that you can, you know, again, have a much more sensible and evidence-based conversation about what it is that you're assuming the right solution might be. Stop trying to understand everything before making a decision. So when I spoke about assumptions and hypotheses before, it kind of seemed like this really nice linear sort of process, like, oh, we have an assumption and now we're just going to go over here to a hypothesis, and that's easy, but it's actually not. It's actually not quite that linear, and getting from this side to this side can actually be a really challenging process. We have a really dictionary definition for what an assumption is, and we have the same for a hypothesis, but we have virtually no clean and linear process that kind of helps us get from one place to the next. And that kind of, in that stage or in that period, that is often where the anxiety that I was talking about earlier comes from. It's like, we've got this assumption, how are we going to actually test it? That can be really anxiety-inducing and quite stressful at times. I think the good news, though, is that getting from an assumption to a hypothesis, in many ways, this is where design actually starts to happen. And this is where the creative process actually starts to begin. And that can become a very empowering point in a project if you look at it that way, rather than saying, oh, there's not a perfect process to kind of get me from here to there that I can actually lean on. So when you're actually trying to get from an assumption to a hypothesis, there's kind of a bit of a spectrum, if you like, of intuition, experience, and also evidence. So it's okay to kind of say, okay, I have an assumption which is based largely on, you know, this feeling that I have. You know, I think designers, and certainly throughout my career, that the word intuition has always been something that we really shy away from. Intuitive design, intuitive strategy, intuitive planning, it's like, ugh, just don't use, like, ugh, it's a bit, not really sure. I think that tension comes from people just not, we just don't feel confident relying on our intuition, and actually nor should we. I think at times there is a time that we can, but the purpose of actually documenting our assumptions as intuitions means that we can actually test those and get evidence and not just rely on it as intuition. And the same goes with experience. So we can actually say, oh, I've observed that when I worked on another project which was similar to this, I saw that this particular thing actually worked really well. Great, we're going to document that and we're going to test it and we're going to build evidence around that. So there is space for intuition. I think it's just about documenting that and testing it. So, test every sprint. So a really big part of human-centred design is obviously designing with people and not for them. It's never too early to test if you know what you're trying to learn. And if you have documented your assumptions and you know what your hypotheses are that you're trying to test, and you have a prototype, even if it's a piece of paper, it's not too early to test. And testing is part of the research process. So don't get too caught up on, oh, we don't know enough, we need to do more research. Testing is research, as long as you know what you're trying to learn. It's a valuable use of time. When you're testing, be methodical about capturing reactions, not opinions. And there is a difference between those two things. We're not asking customers to, like if I could use the financial wellbeing Commonwealth Bank example that I gave in the beginning, when we were testing with customers, we weren't asking them, how would you like us to help you with your financial wellbeing? All of us are not very good at necessarily imagining what the best solutions are going to be to those problems. That's our job to help them, to help come up with solutions to those problems. I think people are very poor at hiding reactions, and that's why that is the best way to kind of document the outcomes of testing. I think the other thing that's really, really important in testing is when you're actually capturing those reactions is kind of codifying the way that you actually capture that information. So there's a little photo just up there in the top, which is what our mentally friendly testing rooms look like. Creepily referred to as the spy room. I think we need a better name for it personally. But from where you can observe the testing that's taking place, we always have people writing cards, which are codified as issues, blocks, opportunities and behaviours. And what that means is that when we get into the room to run a retrospective, we save a lot of time and energy just actually having those already kind of affinity mapped for us and clustered into groups. So that's just a little tip. I just wanted to finish on this last principle, which in some ways is one of the more important ones, and that's learn by creating multiple opportunity areas. So I think one of the differences with human-centred design and the way that I've kind of been talking about our process today compared to a more traditional design approach is we often imagine that the one solution that we're working on at the beginning of the project is the solution, right? So we don't kind of test multiple opportunities. And the problem with that is there's actually no way of knowing, or there's no context, or there's no relativity. There's no way of knowing that that is the best opportunity, right? Because you haven't tested anything else. It's like Usain Bolt looks really fast on the track, but he looks even faster when I'm running next to him. And it's kind of the same thing. So you need to have a couple of opportunity areas to make a really informed decision about which one is the best and to test those with your customers. So you actually want to go through the process of having assumptions and hypotheses against every single one of these and testing them and then converging on one idea once you've had the opportunity to kind of relatively examine each of those. So That's me finished. I thought I'd just shamelessly plug a couple of MF links, if I might. So look forward to your questions later on, and thanks very much for having me.
Thank you very much. I know I took away a number of things there. Certainly the top three: mindset, testing, embracing your bias, and testing. I know that was 4, but I think testing was important to you. So next up, again, I gave her a brief introduction. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Carter Digital's work, but it's has a great impact in the market, and it's wonderful design work. But the brands that they work with, and particularly that Sheree has worked with, are both the enormous ones: Heinz, Nissan, Holden, Fairfax. More importantly, Vegemite, Hungry Jack's. It goes on, and so you can understand the types of experiences that our next speaker is responsible for. In that case, can you please welcome Sheree Henner from Carter Digital?
Thank you for that very generous introduction. So my background is it's actually more of a visual design, I guess kind of graphic design background, and I was kind of going along for a few years, very focused on, I guess, typography and image and space and all those kind of things, and generally just trying to make everything look super, super cool. And it wasn't until I was a few years into my career that I actually read a book that was about user experience, and it completely shifted my entire mindset about what it was I actually did. And I had never actually thought before that I actually designed for people. Like, it never occurred to me what I was doing, someone at the other end of that was actually affected. And so I sort of moved through and kind of did dual UI sort of UX roles, and now officially very much have gone over completely to user experience. So I work at Carter Digital. So we're an experience and innovation agency. I've got a really lucky role in the sense that everyone that works there has the same philosophy, with sort of a people-first approach to design, even developers and account managers and project managers, which certainly makes my job a lot easier. We work with a lot of different clients. We work with a lot of arts and culture organisations. We work a lot with clients that are really trying to make a big impact on the world and try and help our environment. So like things like Trust for Nature and Wilderness Society, and working with people trying to stop, animal extinction and climate change and these kinds of things. We work a lot in the non-for-profit and education space as well. Verso, for instance, is a sort of a global learning platform that helps kind of disadvantaged children communicate with their teachers a lot better in a way that the traditional classroom doesn't kind of offer. And we work with like Beyond Blue and Black Dog Institute, and really helping sort of build tools for people suffering with mental health issues. And we work a lot in the health space as well. So quite working with like Heart Foundation, which is more about, I guess, education and prevention, and then sort of working with hospitals, which is quite serious work in the sense that the tools that you are building are kind of that can be that sort of that middle ground in between someone's like life and death, essentially. So just a few of my, I don't want to say favourite clients, but perhaps some of my, the ones I'm very, very passionate about. We've been working with Indigenous Business Australia for quite some time. We've got quite a few projects with them on at the moment. And I think for me what's been so interesting, especially being Australian, and I think our education and our media really kind of really is kind of doing us all a disadvantage in the sense that we just don't learn about Indigenous people, and it's been incredibly rewarding going out, and we've been able to go out into regional and rural areas and speak to Indigenous people about their lives, and we've kind of learnt about those disadvantages and just been really inspired by I guess their commitment to their community and the commitment to the land. So what we're actually doing for them is we're building a series of a few different tools to kind of help Indigenous business owners. And what we like to talk about with Carter is kind of really sort of assess not just what we're doing or who we're sort of doing it for, but I guess the larger design impact that we're making. As much as, we're sort of building these tools to kind of help Indigenous business owners, whether they're starting a business or whether they're starting to grow a business. But essentially the bigger impact is that we're actually helping them, especially in regional rural areas, helping those areas to kind of give opportunities back into that community and give more jobs and that kind of thing. I've been working with RACGP for a little while, so they're the Royal Australian College of GPs. So essentially they, I guess, I'm not sure of the number, but basically to sort of get credited as a GP and to do your ongoing learning, you have to be a member of RACGP. So this is a particular project that was more about their the tool that kind of people had to, or the GPs had to log their ongoing training and learning with. When we went out and spoke to GPs, it was seen as something that was incredibly painful and a bureaucratic type of thing that they just had no time for, and they're busy people anyway. And sort of like our brief was kind of, I guess, to essentially make it work better, make it more usable, make it a little less painful. And what we kind of do is, rather than sort of just kind of go on that sort of avenue, what we wanted to do is kind of reimagine it, I guess, and reframe that problem. So rather than it being something that is more usable or something that makes it a bit easier, how did we actually make this useful and something that the GPs wanted to use and that would actually assist them in their careers and help them in their jobs, which is to help their communities. And it was quite an interesting sort of thing, sort of reframing that problem can have a huge impact on the client as well. And suddenly all that kind of red tape that you get, no, we have to ask this question and this input field has to be there and this is required. Suddenly they sort of started getting excited. And then those kinds of things we didn't have to do so much, and we were able to kind of get rid of a few of those things and make it a bit easier. And the impact of this was really not just helping GPs and making their jobs better, but essentially, everyone has to go to the GP. We all have to get, whether it's just a referral to a specialist or whatever the case may be, but it's not just helping GPs and it's not just helping their learning, it's ensuring that they are at the top of their field and their learning and they know about their community and how that actual community is changing so they can be prepared for that. Another one is a project we've worked with for the Heart Foundation. It's called Healthy Active by Design, and essentially it's a program that's been put together to help planners and developers to build essentially healthier communities. So a lot of communities or developments, especially in sort of lower socioeconomic areas, they're going up with no footpaths. Some are going down with, there no bike paths, there's no community areas for children, this kind of thing. So essentially what this tool is, it's a tool for planners to use. It's got lots of case studies, heaps of academic research, lots of things that they can use and reference in their submissions to sort of the people who are in charge and make those decisions, whether they go ahead or not. And what we really wanted to do was just kind of focus on just making it super, super easy to reference. It's nothing, wasn't meant to be super fancy. It just needs to be really easy to move through, really interesting content, a lot of really visual sort of case studies, just so people can continue to learn. And it's not just the planners, it's also educators as well, university professors sort of use it. But also we want to encourage those people that are at the other end, the people that make decisions to help themselves to learn better. So when proposals come through and there is no environment kind of considered or health environment, they can sort of say why and insist that it be that better spaces are built. And the design impact of this is really sort of ultimately improving the livability and the quality of our environment so that people will, obviously people don't want to just sort of stay at home. People need to get out in the community and be active and that type of thing. So I guess what I wanted to do is just kind of talk a little bit about, perhaps for those people that are not so sure if they want to move into UX or it's something that they could be interested in, just sort of a little bit of insight into, I guess, what the things to expect is. So one of the things I think designers are kind of notorious for sticking their headphones on and sitting in the corner and being considered the genius. Very, very different in UX. So one of the first things is, you sort of, well, more important than actually just talking to people, you need to listen. But one of the best relationships is definitely with developers, and developers provide insight as to, there's another way that we can do this to simplify it. In that case, we can spend more time on features that are more important to our users. So really important to have a good relationship. And you need to talk to different departments. So often UX is, especially in sort of organisations that are just kind of opening up to it, it's kind of be stuck in the marketing or digital or whatever it may be. It's incredibly important to talk to the other departments, and I think the most important department is always going to be the customer service department, because they're going to give you incredible insights into what sort of the frustrations and the needs of the customers might be. And it's incredibly valuable to talk to them before you sort of go out and do user research and talk to users, because that can sort of help frame the questions that you're going to ask. And so when you do talk to users, it's a lot more meaningful. And the last one's obvious. You need to talk to users. It seems obvious, but a lot of people are not doing it and calling themselves UX practitioners, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I think one of the other big differences is you're not in that situation where it's a big presentation and the client's sitting there and everyone's all excited. It's about sort of embracing failure and actually seeking it and knowing that what you're creating is not meant to be the best thing in the world. You need to go out and test it with people so that you can learn every single thing that's wrong with it, and you want to learn every single thing that's wrong with it, and you're not trying to cover that up. It also means constant change. So one of the things I think people get a little bit stuck on is the different processes involved or the different activities, whether it's sprints or affinity mapping or journey mapping or card sorting or whatever it is. It's every one of these are used for a different purpose. So every problem that you'll get is going to be different, and you have to get used to sort of that change, is that what you did last time might not necessarily work the next time. And I think one of the really important things is that leadership actually need to be the champions of that failure. Too often they kind of, there's a bit of a trend to kind of want to hire a UX designer and then you stick them in the marketing department and that's kind of done, when they're struggling with sort of this new approach, this kind of fail-first approach. And it has to come from leadership, because if they kind of expect the best, then they're never going to learn, and kind of that's the whole design thinking process, is to learn quickly and make mistakes as long as they're done early on in the process. So I think user experiences and creativity is not often used in the same sentence, and I think that's a real shame. I think it's actually, for me, I think it's a far more creative endeavour than certainly what I found in visual design. And I think we need more creatives in the actual industry. And the reason, there's sort of, there's problems around this is like this double diamond approach I'm sure a lot of people have seen, but this kind of explore section, what people keep doing is they keep looking towards it and kind of going, all right, what's the competitor doing, or how did someone else solve this in a certain way, or they continue to produce the same solutions to different problems. And I think what we're really, really missing is people who can look at the problem in a completely different way and think outside of that box that's kind of always there. And I think, to use a really obvious example, is if you look at Uber, instead of sort of They looked at user needs, and they didn't just make a better taxi service or made that a little bit more efficient. They completely reimagined the entire thing for multiple people. And I think we need a lot more of that. And so I think if there's creatives in the audience that are thinking that don't know whether it's for them, I would highly encourage them, because I think we need a lot more creative people there. And my final point is just around sort of the idea that UX is kind of, I think it's a very unique role. It's kind of a role that you can actually meet the people that you're helping, and you can actually create change, and you can actually see that change afterwards and continue to improve it. I don't think there's many roles where you can actually do that. And so I would really sort of encourage anyone, whether it's, and it doesn't have to be like about humanities and that type of thing. It could be, if people are interested in a certain technology and want to see it sort of take off, or if they're working in an industry that they're finding really frustrating, they can actually be the people that come in and make that change for everyone, really, to don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know how to finish it. And that's it. So thank you.
Well, again, some food for thought there. And I know that I like to hear that, seek failure. I don't have to worry about that. Failure finds me. So that's always good. So we've got that high-level vision from Laura and strategy, and some more, slightly more practical on how to implement from Sheree. And at the other end, slightly different again from Cisco, as again, Adobe's moving into this space on a practical, technical level. It always amazes me that I do a number of presentations to internal creatives, and I ask them, what's their number one tool for designing user experiences, and they go InDesign, and I go, okay, we need to talk. And so that's the sort of space that we're in, and I want you there to not feel that's a drawback. It's not just about the tooling, but it's about the terminology and the verbiage and what does it all mean, and that's what we're trying to deliver to you this afternoon. So on some of that other side of it, and to go through his personal journey of how he obviously started as a print designer and is now the product manager for Adobe XD, can you please welcome Cisco Guzman?
Oh my God, I had some coffee right before, so I'm feeling really excited. I hope you guys are really excited. It's really humbling, Laura and Sheree, to share this session with you. I feel like we're talking about worlds that sort of overlap, and we bring such different things to it. And I think it's great to do that. And so what I wanted to do was to start maybe by just sort of like surfacing my own bias and like where I come from. As Michael said, I work on XD, and I had no idea that I could ever have that job. Like, literally never thought it. I skip to work every day, it's good that I only live a mile away, because that's a lot of skipping. But I didn't know that. I had no idea. I majored in feminist studies. I went to school at Stanford. And it's basically interdisciplinary philosophy. And what that basically meant was that when I graduated, I had no possibilities of getting a job. I absolutely, but I could think and I could communicate. Anyway, so what ended up happening is that I slowly started to realize that what I was really good at was designing, and that was because I sort of learned Photoshop, Illustrator, and Quark, and PageMaker all on my own. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is kind of fun, like space and stuff and people. This is really cool. And so I just started going down that road. I've done product management and brand management and design for brands like Banana Republic. In this situation, one of the things that I was really doing was helping with product development, but also leading on the marketing on the design side. I've created lines that have been bought by lines like, places like Target and Kohl's and things like that. So more traditional consumer packaged goods design. I've done a lot of stuff in the beauty industry. This was some early in the days of UX, like for me anyway, where like we were drawing like these, like trying to map new business processes, and stuff was really awful and ugly, right? But like it was more that we were trying to figure out how stuff should work. Anyway, so that's a little bit, about me, and I've done a lot of different sort of design. Basically, if you're a designer, it means that depending on the organization or the situation that you're in, you're going to be doing something slightly different, right? It's always kind of based on what you do. But I can do, like more visual design, and I can do packaging design, and I can do advertising, and lots of different types of things. Okay, enough about me. Now, I wanna valorize that interdisciplinary philosophy degree. All right, career crossroads. So in my mind, this is what I think happens as like a graphic designer or a designer, like a product designer. When I saw the UX thing starting to happen, I was just like what am I gonna do? And the answer is fake it. That's number one. Number two is we have the interwebs now. All you have to do is look it up. And I'm not joking. Like the thing that I learned over and over and over again as I started moving from one thing to another was that relying on the people around me and asking questions, like nobody teaches you how to go to, how to do print. You just figure it out. People teach you. I mean, some people learn it by going to school, but like honestly, you learn it from talking to printers, and you learn from talking to other designers. And I learned that once I actually got into the field of design. And so this is going to be a little bit different from, I think, what has been said, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or wrong. It's just like different approaches, right? I personally think that as a graphic designer or any kind of a designer, I think you know what you need to know in order to do UX. So this is just a little bit of my personal perspective on how I think design has sort of like evolved over the course of the last 100 years, and how those beliefs and approaches to commercial and personal art essentially become the foundations of what a product is. So if you look at the modernist sort of period where people like Saul Bass and people like that were sort of designing and developing campaigns, we're really talking about modalities in which corporations were developing, conceiving of, building, and then marketing and pushing. So it was just like you build something for someone, and I think that was said before, right? We've built this thing, we've made it, how do we get people to buy it? And so what ends up happening is that the individual is seen as kind of a consumer of goods, right? And at the same time, what was happening in art at that time period was a tension, and the artist and the designer was seen as the person who was really trying to balance form and function, and to set a really interesting moment in time where those two things were sort of at play or opposed in some way that was interesting. And so there was a lot of attention to like the structural elements, and that's why and meaning being located in the author's intent, right? So it was all about being that genius in the ivory tower and being like, like I had, this reminds me, my assistant came up to me one day and she was like, Cisco, we have a huge problem. And I was like, what? What, Scotty? What's the problem? And she was like, the artwork for the spa bags is due today. And I was like, oh my God, Scotty, what are we going to do? And she's like, we need a concept immediately. And I was like, unforgettable skin. And she was like, oh, that's genius. But like, and I was like, make it happen, Scotty. But it's like that, like that's like the thing that I think some people think design is, and I think maybe I tried doing that for a little while. And then there are these other sort of modalities that we occupy, and we have these formal structures that we communicate with, like line, shape, unity, harmony, layout, typography, like all of that stuff still matters, right? It's okay. Like, you have something and it's still going to be good. Okay, moving right along. So then what ended up happening then is that we started to expose that kind of a modality of creating things for people was problematic. There wasn't a lot of diversity, and people were sort of seen as customers of brands, and so you would try to develop things that were kind of, I want to say, like masquerading as real experience, but still very much the old model. I'm going to fast forward because I think this is really where we're headed. I think we're moving to a situation where the individual has really become a subscriber of, oh, I love that, like, you can't even see the word there, of experiences, right? And I think what that really means, right, is that ultimately, at any point in time, someone can just log off. They can just cancel. And I think what that's done for companies is to make them realize that there is no difference between form and function, that people have self-directed purpose. I call it the heart path and the hand path. It's super simple. If you had designed Uber 15 or 20 years ago, you know what it would look like, right? There would be like a bar down the left, and it would be like, about us, about our services, like, and then there would be these tomes of information about like how it works and like about you, but it's like now you log on and it's just like, you need a car, get a car. And so we've shifted away from believing that what we're doing and creating is about us and about the company and about the product. And it's just like somebody wants something and they're trying to get there. Your ability to succeed is really just based on you helping them to get there as quickly as possible. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back here. I think that designers have always been responsible for determining what space looks like. That's just what it is. We create physically, we create physical things. We lay things out in relationship to one another. That's why we're good at geometry. It's just like this is what we do. We conceive of relationships and of space. We define space in the individual's relationship to it. We architect how people have meaningful experiences, and that's not changed. That's always been the case. I remember, working on consumer packaged goods, on perfumes and lotions and shampoos, and we were user-centric. 25 years ago, we were doing that. It was simply that the relationships that we were basing our study on were, I'll give you an example. Instead of like sitting down and talking to people about their shopping habits, we would just go to the shopping center and watch people. And then we would ask them questions. So I feel like some of the things that we did as graphic designers to vet our own work is still very much... So I think the means of production has changed, yes. Like, it's digital now, it's not print. The technical capabilities have evolved. There's definitely some jargon there that if you don't understand, there are lots of resources out there on the internet that can help you. The tools have changed. It's XD now, but if you've learned Illustrator and Photoshop, like, it's not that hard. Humans behave differently. Yeah, we actually do have different behaviors now, but have we changed? Not really. Internally, we're still driven by the same things. We're emotionally still the same creatures. And so in my mind, the designer's job is still the same thing, which is to help that individual connect with whatever it is that the company is offering, some kind of a service. Okay, this is my favorite game. Like, who wore it better, like Instacart or like traditional milk delivery? Like, who wore it better, Uber or the personal litter, the personal carrier thing? Twitter or like old-fashioned chit-chat? I mean, I'm being serious here, right? Because what I'm getting at is that what those really successful products do is they basically just sort of reify a structure around what people are just naturally inclined to do. So if as a designer you see yourself as applying the skills that you had in layout and relationships between those things, and you see yourself as mapping relationships between the individual and all of their actions and everything around them, that's basically what it is. And fundamentally, we're just people building things for people with other people. I say this to my team all the time because it's just like, there's like an emergency and it's just like, oh my God, like we gotta land the space shuttle. It's just like all super complicated. And I'm just like, we're just people building things for people with other people. If we just like remember that. And your value as a graphic designer or UX designer or somebody in between who's sort of toying with the idea of doing one or the other, I think that the thing you can bring most to the work is the ability to empathize and to understand some of these. I believe we're star children as creative people, and I fundamentally think that art can heal us as a global community. And so if you see yourself as being one of the professionals that brings that forward, and you use these tools to do that, and you make people's lives better, that's design, There's another myth out there, which is just that it's just so complicated today. And I'm like, it was pretty complicated before that. It was pretty complicated. Like, all the way through. We have huge technical skills, all the way from like doing rub downs and like photo shoots and like dye sublimation and there are lots of things that we had to learn. Just think of it as what you're doing is it's just that it's less about us and that it's more about them. The process has changed, and I think I'll try to just go through this as quickly as possible. One of the things that happened that I learned the hard way was had to do with profitability as a designer, and it just had to do with the fact that you got 3 rounds when I wrote an estimate, and the first was concept, and if you bought off on a concept and we moved into layout and then you changed your mind, that was fine, but you were going to pay me more, right? And so then if you moved into layout and then you ended up, and then you would move into refinement. And the whole idea was that a boat making its way through a canal and a system of locks, there were consequences for going backwards. And I think a lot of what we've done, and this is some of what you can get on the internet widely, this is not my artwork. It's not as, I can only aspire to this, but what's interesting is that what I was talking about before in terms of you make a product and you ship it out to people regardless of what it is, that's why that waterfall cascading model exists. It's that it's you give a brief, you make it, you ship, you know what I mean? And this is really based more on an idea of okay, let's just come up with some hypotheses and some theories. Let's prototype quickly and then let's go figure it out. This week. And then you do that again and again and again. I'm going to skip over that. The design thinking process, it's out there, and this is intuitive. Oops, I said it. But I think that we come programmed to do this as designers, truthfully. There's this thing, this is some of my personal artwork, but what ends up happening is when you doodle something over and over and over again, and then you realize you're doodling it for a reason, this is how I train product managers. What I'm explaining to them, this is a table with product manager 1, product manager 2, product manager 3, designer 1, designer 2, and then 3 engineers. And in the middle, there's a question. Should the button be blue or should it be black, right? Let's just simplify. And I tell them that that in that room, usually what happens is this is a volley of opinions. And from studying philosophy, we know that, or at least I know that there's something called an inarguable proposition, and it's a matter of personal taste, like an opinion. And usually what happens in here is that it's just opinions. They might be informed, enlightened even, depending on who you're hanging out with. But it's still not real. I mean, it's still an opinion. So the product manager's job is to take that question and leave the room. And essentially, what that has resulted in, I know it's more crazy. It's more crazy. And this is what I'll leave you with. I actually stole this from Marx and Hegel. But it is the dialectic, that notion. As a designer now, if you think about like whatever it is that graphic design means to you, and if you think about what it's like to do UX now or to be a product designer, I think it's one thing. And that is to acknowledge that the difference between a circle and going around in circles and going upward and forward are these moments of punctuated equilibrium, right? At the edges of those iterations where you've asked a question and you've either found that hypothesis to be true or you have found it to be, not true, and you have to go back to the drawing board. But that process, as you start at the bottom, is very short. It's very fast, right? And as you start moving from discovery and then into pre-production and production and finally like something actually releases, those paths are wider and they're more expensive, which is why you want to do as many of these as you can at the very beginning. And I feel like there's a lot of intersection here between this is a complete vindication of my of my joblessness in the first year after college, right? Because I'm just like, when I was sitting there looking at the problem of how we built product on the XD team, I thought about how really fundamentally what we're trying to do is to understand our customers. And a lot of you are our customers, right? That's why we go out and have a lot of engagements, and we're always bugging you guys to be like, can we come and hang out? And people are like, oh God, here they come. But it's because of that. It's because we're trying to take our questions around what kind of tools you would want to use, and then we want to fail early and often. So anyway, I'll stop there. Hopefully that's been helpful. Thank you.
Cisco, you said, have we changed? And you said, no. So I'm going to take you up on that, because I don't know the answer to this. But we may not have changed as designers. We're very empathetic creatures. But surely the world has changed, and the world in which we live changed, and the types of interaction, the types of processes, the multiples. So I'll start with you, Laura. My initial reaction to that was, no, we've changed utterly and fundamentally. We're so very, very different to what even we were 20 years ago. Or is there a core there that we can get to? So if you're looking at user experience design, how much of that do we have to take into account? Or do you agree with what Cisco said, there's still a fundamental core that we haven't really changed?
It's a difficult question, because the ways in which I think we assume that we've changed, the obvious ones obviously being the way that we access technology, for example, has changed enormously. But I think I agree with Cisco's statement largely, because I think there are certain human behaviours that will probably never change. And I think if we can try and approach the way that humans behave as being just largely unpredictable, that will probably put us in a position where we can solve for their needs regardless of whether they've changed or not. So I think the important thing for us as designers is to maybe not hypothesize about whether customers have changed or not, but to try and understand their behaviours and document their assumptions. I know I love talking about assumptions, but seriously, document what we think their assumptions are, and then test around those and learn whether they behave in the way we assume they will or not.
So I'm going to ask the second question before we get in, and I'll take it to you, Sheree, to start with, is going at the other end, from that high level, have we changed what we need to quite tactical? We're here, we're on a Thursday. It is Thursday, isn't it? It's been one of those weeks. And everyone will go back and they'll go back to their office or their job on Friday and say, what was it like? What did you learn? What do they do come Monday? If they are on the edges of this whole new environment of expression, what should they do come Monday?
As in if they're going to become...
Yeah.
I guess, it's about, I guess if they're in a role where that's perhaps user experience is not what it's considered, it's just a matter of sort of talking to people, and I think it's a lot about educating people around and kind of getting them excited, and then actually just going out and doing it, going out and testing, going out and talking to people and just taking that initiative. And not sort of waiting for approval or waiting for permission. Just
okay.
Yeah.
So Cisco, was there a point in time where you woke up from, yesterday I was a print designer and today I'm a user experience designer, or do you wait for a brief or a position that helps you do that transition? Was it, I suppose, proactive on your part or reactive to the environment around you? You just found yourself in that position.
I just ended up finding myself in that position. I was in charge of product management for a financial services company that gave people loans on their artwork. And that meant that the business process needed to be completely designed. And then in addition to that, we were trying to do this over the internet. And so in the process of doing the business mapping in order to build the product, we then ended up starting to build the interface for the product. And so then I was like, wait a minute, this isn't really and then I was using graphic design to map the business process. And sometimes those design skills can help you to help those around you to solve problems, because that's ultimately what everyone's trying to do. I thought there is one very specific suggestion that I have. It's something that I would be doing right now if I was trying to make that leap right now. And I think it goes, Sheree, to what you were talking about. I think it's really compelling to actually just do something. There's Behance, there's Dribbble, there are all these avenues in which you can project and put information out there. I think that the most compelling thing you can do is find 3 experiences that you think are subpar and redesign them. And then if you put that out there, you will start to make a portfolio for yourself. Don't wait to have that job. Find an experience that you think is crappy and redesign it. And then let that be, because in a lot of ways, that's really what someone is looking for, right? It's for your way of processing and approaching something.
One of the things that, Laura, you started with too was bias. And moving into user experience design, you said embrace your bias. I'm going to jump ahead. There was a great quote I'm going to repeat from earlier this week, that there are more CEOs in Australia called Andrew than female CEOs. And so how do you... I know, it's such a good line. I stole that. So the breaking of the bias, and not just gender bias and race bias that I think you also mentioned, Sheree, but your own biases of what you, or how you work and how you do that. How, if you're jumping into this user experience field and you've got to embrace your bias, how do you first of all find out what your biases are, and how do you carry them with you to make it a benefit as opposed to a drag?
Yeah, I think biases kind of come out in a lot of different ways. So you kind of mentioned, gender bias and race bias. I think one of the big biases to be aware of on projects in particular is looking at cognitive bias, and also, biases towards risk or those types of things. It's often difficult to be aware of what your biases are, but if you can start talking about experiences, I think that's a really constructive way to kind of start surfacing what some of your biases might actually be. I think on projects, certainly in my experience, the the greatest, the ones that have the potential to be the most damaging, but the ones to also have the potential to draw the most opportunity, are when you believe that you can apply a result from a previous project, sort of like just, cut, paste here. And I think, as I said before, we all want to simplify a process. We all are working on tight timeframes and agile ways of working. So I think that's fair enough that we might think that way. I think the important thing is to kind of test those biases and try and get evidence out of it, rather than assume that it's a foregone conclusion that what we've actually seen work in the past can be cut and paste and applied to a different scenario.
Yes, Sheree, you were nodding.
Yeah, I think also too, something that's really, really important is having a diverse team. I found just myself, like, sort of had a situation last year where we were doing some user testing, and I was doing it with someone completely different background to me, and our interpretation of the same person and the same results was completely different based on our backgrounds. And I think that's really powerful to make sure that you have a team with different genders and different backgrounds and that kind of thing. That really helps.
Well, I have got, as I said, multiple pages, but unfortunately time has got away from us now. We have a couple of minutes left. Any last thoughts? Again, Cisco, you mentioned redesign someone's interface, but any last thoughts from you for the audience today?
I think Sheree's is probably the one that really resonates with me, which is just talk to people. The piece of advice that I got as a graphic designer was to get a book, the Haydn manual to publishing, and to always have that with me, number one. And number two, to always have a great relationship with a printer and another graphic designer, and that those three things would save me. And sure enough, every time that I got into that situation, that would help me. And I feel like now more than ever, with our ability to connect to other people, going to meetups, like just taking a proactive role and saying, like, I'm just going to go to this UX camp, or I'm going to go to this meetup, even if you don't really know that much about it. Just start going. You'll pick it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is some time after with our speakers. We'll be milling around here, so if you don't have to leave, please hang around. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Can you please thank Laura, Sheree and Cisco? Thank you very much.